What it do, Dream Team? Welcome back to the channel. Here we are with Britain shouldn't pay reparations. Slave descendants have better life today than Africans. And now before we dive into this video, I just want to say if you end up enjoying it, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and give the video a like. Also, if you have a video suggestion that you would like to request, I take it in one of three ways. One being you can drop it in the comment section. Two, you can subscribe to Patreon and request it there. Or three, there's a link in the description section where I take premium as well as free requests. This title caught my attention just because when the reparations argument always comes up, it's hard. It's a hard argument to have because a lot of the time when it comes to reparations, a lot of the people around today aren't the people who did the crimes of the past. It was their ancestors who did those crimes. So it's hard to tell people today, you should pay me reparations for what your ancestors did to mine. And so on that topic, it's just a very sticky topic. It's a very tough topic because of that. I don't know how you guys feel about it, and whether you agree with the reparations or disagree with reparations. That's how you feel about it, and I'm not here to argue, not here to judge. I just, from my perspective, that's where I come from. When I think of reparations, I think it's just very hard to make people pay now for what their ancestors did in the past. But let's hear this video and hear what they've got to say.
All right, well, the latest bonkers thing to come out of British politics is that Labour MP Clive Lewis has called on the government to open negotiations with its former colonies in the Caribbean to discuss reparations for the British Empire's role in the slave trade. The call follows the example of the Trevelyan family who travelled to Grenada last year to apologise for their family's role in enslaving 1,000 Africans on the island. With me now is Rafe Manku, who is a royal broadcaster and commentator. Rafe, thank you very much. It's kicked off in the inbox about this. Do you think the British taxpayer should pay to say sorry for the slave trade that was hundreds of years ago?
Absolutely not. You know, it's enough of this self-flagellation. It's time that Britain stopped apologising and stopped being lectured and made to feel guilty by these fringe radicals like Clive Lewis. One might ask why he's not protesting, outside the embassies of Chad or Mali or Sudan or Nigeria, which currently have horrific levels of slavery in them. And it's funny how Mr. Lewis and all of his ilk are mysteriously silent about those current atrocities. You might think they've got an ulterior agenda behind them, and it's not really slavery that's the issue. Look, if they were having this discussion 200 years ago, of course we'd be in favour of reparations for slaves who were directly affected. But this is 2023. Agreed. We're talking about 6 or 7 generations later, the great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren of slaves. And the cold, hard facts for Mr. Lewis are that the descendants of slaves living in the Caribbean have a far better quality of life than they would have had if their ancestors had remained in Africa. Because Britain's Caribbean possessions, unlike West Africa where the slaves come from, are now middle-income countries. So the Bahamas has a GDP per head which is comparable to Spain and Italy, and it's higher than Portugal, which actually had many more slaves shipped than Britain ever did. You look at Barbados.
That's very interesting to know. And he's kind of hinting at the same things I said, right? If it was 200 years ago, of course, after slavery had ended, reparations, it wouldn't even be an argument. Those slave owners should definitely pay reparations to all those slaves, 100%. But with it being now, it's just, how can you expect people, like, if reparations were going to be given, they should have been given then. But to be given today is just, to me, it's unrealistic that it would actually happen. Now, I don't know about, there may be countries out here paying reparations. I don't know. But I just feel like it's very unrealistic because it's generations later. It was people's ancestors doing these things, and so it's very hard. And then it'd be like, hey, if they pay reparations, I feel like the whole world should have to pay reparations because at one point or another, everybody in the world, it seems like, was involved in slavery of one form or another. But the British were the ones who actually stood up and ended it. And yeah, they were wrong for being involved in it in the first place. but so was the entire world that was involved in it. So everybody would have been wrong, not just the British, but the British were the ones who saw that they were wrong and actually did something about it, as opposed to the rest of the world. They actually fought it not only in their home but around the world to stop it, which is awesome. But I don't know how life in the Caribbean is, so I can't comment on that. I can only go off what he says in this video. I don't know how life in West Africa is. I personally don't know who's got the better quality of life and everything. But from what he's saying, it sounds like, yes, in the Caribbean they are doing better. I feel like they could have been doing good without slavery if they would have just been kind of taught still by the Europeans, because most of these countries that were colonized or put into slavery, they learned a lot of things from their colonizers, the ones who held them captive, or who made them slaves. They learned a lot of things which helped progress, I guess, how they live today. But they could have, I guess, those things still could have been shared without slavery happening. But that's just me. We'll let him continue.
Which actually had many more slaves shipped than Britain ever did. You look at Barbados or St. Kitts and Nevis or Antigua, they've all got higher rankings amongst the UN Human Development Index than Brazil or Mexico or many of the countries colonized by the Spanish. And then if you compare that and contrast that with the countries of West Africa from where the slaves originally came, well, look at Benin, for example. The GDP per capita of Benin here, I've got, is $1,430 per year. In Barbados, it's 17,000. That's 10 times higher. And life expectancy in Benin is 62. In Barbados, it's 79. So yes, slavery was abhorrent, but for those who were enslaved. But had they stayed in Africa, their 21st century descendants today would be living dramatically worse lives. Get a grip.
Okay, what about the old Barbary slaves as well? Because if we're doing the reparations thing, then maybe they could go the other way.
Yeah, absolutely. What about the Barbary slaves? Well, over 1 million white people were brought into slavery in the Barbary slave trade.
My God.
And also, what about the demands made for Africans to pay reparations? Why isn't Mr. Lewis actually asking for Nigeria or Benin to pay reparations to people in the Caribbean? Because, of course, the white slavers had their ships moored off the coast and they didn't venture inshore. They purchased slaves that had been captured by other Africans, and there were more slaves held in bondage and in slavery in Africa than were ever transported across the oceans. And actually the slave trade continued far longer. The Islamic slave trade of African slaves carried on well into the 20th century, and modern day slavery, of course, exists. There are more slaves in bondage today than there were any time under the British Empire, with Pakistan actually being the worst culprit in all of this. And then again, of course, why should British taxpayers pay for slavery reparations when only 3,000 people in this country ever owned slaves? The majority of British people in this country descend from people who lived lives of abject poverty, terrible hardships, akin to serfdom.
I mean, it's strong stuff, Rafe. Thank you very much for enlightening us all with that. It's Rafe Haydo-Manku, as ever, a wonderful addition to any show. He's a royal broadcaster and commentator and historian as well, in case you couldn't tell.
So I understand what he's saying, and like I mean, I kind of agree with what he said when it comes to why should the British taxpayer pay reparations when I feel like they did nothing wrong. It was not them. And then he said only 3,000 slave owners actually lived in the country of Britain. So even when slavery was a thing, and it was definitely abhorrent, and it was definitely wrong, and it's definitely awful, Britain, where while it was happening in Britain, it wasn't as common as so many other places. And then the Africans selling other Africans into slavery, and I kind of learned how that worked. It weren't that they saw these other Africans as their people, or it was that, hey, these were enemy tribes, these tribes who were fighting, these tribes who were at war. And so you capture another tribe, I guess you're not really going to show them mercy because they just tried to kill you. Y'all were just at war with each other. So what they did was they decided, hey, well, we have them captured, and these people coming in from different countries all over the world came in and paid for them, and they became slaves that way. It's just, it's an awful past. Slavery is just an awful thing that I wish nobody would have ever had to go through in the history of humanity. But it is a part of the history of humanity, unfortunately. Pakistan, I guess, still has it. I don't know too much about Pakistan. I'm still learning a lot about the rest of the world and a lot about history. So bear with me. But that's all we got for this video. If you guys enjoyed that, make sure you check out that one next. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. See you guys on the next one.